What's up, everybody? Jay Miller here, bringing another Productivity in Tech podcast. My guest this week is Ish Shabazz. So Ish is someone that is actually pretty close to where I'm at. In fact, I've been able to sit down and have a good meal with him and talk productivity, talk computers, talk technology, and really get to know Ish on a closer level than I would most of my guests. But even still, in spite of that, I still learned so much about this amazing app developer who has a new app out called Capsicum. For those that don't know, Capsicum is basically like the digital bullet journal, or at least the closest thing to it to date. Now, I had the opportunity to play around with Capsicum, and I have to say that while none of my ideas made it into the final version, he is still iterating on it, and we talk about that, and we also talk about the journey that it took to build the app. Now, you know me, I don't like to talk productivity apps on this show. I think productivity apps are a necessary evil, but can often lead to over-analyzing our systems and, in fact, hinder us from being productive. But more than anything with this, I didn't want to bring Ish on because he has a productivity app. I wanted to bring Ish on because of the story that led to his productivity app. Ish has put out so many applications that have all culminated into this one big thing, and he's not done yet. In fact, he's already working on new features, and he's probably got some new app ideas already out while I've been talking. So I'm going to get out of the way. Here it is, my conversation with Ish Shabazz. So, dude, how's it been since, what was the name of the place that we ate at? Like, I can't remember the name of it now.
I think it was called like Lazy Dog or something.
I think it was. I remember they had like a bison meatloaf that was absolutely amazing. I've been thinking about that. I actually told my wife about that. I was like, we need to figure out how to get up there, and I'm going to take her on a date there one day. Who knows?
There you go.
And then there's a trivia guy that lives up in the area near y'all. So I'm a big trivia nut. So for me, that might be cool. Catch a trivia night and then have some dinner.
Oh, cool.
But so it's been a minute, man. Like the last time that I think we chatted was right before Capsicum was going live, like maybe a week before.
I think it was actually right before, maybe even right before the beta.
Oh, yeah.
Is when we were chatting.
Or maybe like right after the beta. Because I remember like chatting with Heidi for a little bit and like trying to figure out like, okay, was there any way that I could help out? Just getting the word out and telling people about this. For people listening, Ish is one of the people that it's funny. I've not known any movie stars in my life until I met Ish, but he will be the first person to tell you that he's not a movie star. So it's really interesting to see like another going to throw this out there, another person of color
right,
doing something that like scratches an itch. So normally I would we just keep talking through it, but give everybody like the quick like 5-second introduction to who you are and what you're all about.
Okay. So my name is Ish. I'm an independent app developer. Been writing iOS apps since about 2010. I really just basically love apps. So I've been working on various sorts of apps, usually productivity, since about then. And as I do kind of more in that space, I'm trying to kind of build a community a bit and reach out to folks who maybe are inexperienced in app development, maybe want to get into it without a background, things like that. So lately I've also been doing like things like speaking at conferences and things like that, just to kind of draw some attention to the community.
Dude, that's awesome. And I might have to pick you up on that because I don't know if I showed you, I sent you a link to Conf Talks, right?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, it's man, I did not realize building like an app that you want to share with people was so frustrating. Like the UI's changed, the back end's changed a ton. I've gone through like, I got one AWS bill and I was like, yeah, no, this is not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
yeah, it's super interesting to see how things like that change. But, what's interesting is you mentioned building productivity apps and obviously this is a quote unquote productivity, podcast. Aren't there enough productivity apps out there already?
There are never enough, honestly, which is an interesting thing about productivity apps. There's always room to kind of try a new method, try a new angle on it. It's almost like, aren't there enough books out there? No, there's always room for more. So each person kind of has their own particular way of doing things. For some folks, they found the app for them. They've been using an app for years and they're good, but there's always, I think, room for tools to help us be more productive.
So was your app built in like none of these apps are doing it for me, I want to make something that works for me? Or was it like, I see an area where productivity apps are falling short. Maybe if I build this, I can be the next like mega super app developer?
Actually, I was scratching in a long time itch. So basically, almost since the iPad came out, Steve Jobs had one stage with the iPad, and I was like, wow, that is a gigantic screen. What will I use it for? And what came to mind was a daily planner. At the time, I was really into like the Franklin Covey style planners, and I thought it would be really cool if there's an app like that. And then later on, I thought, well, if there's not, maybe I can build one. And that's actually how I jumped into app development with that idea. It didn't take long before I realized that was way over my head at the time. I didn't have the skill set. And actually, not all the technology was there to make something like that useful at the time. So kind of over the years, I was working on other apps. And then one day, and sitting at a Starbucks, I saw a friend's bullet journal. I was like, what is that? That thing is gorgeous. And I asked her to take a look, and she kind of showed me, explained bullet journaling to me and what that was. I was like, I bet I could make the app now. And then from that point on, I got in touch with Heidi, and we started talking about design ideas and ways of actually kind of bringing the functionality of some of the things from bullet journaling, but even more, almost like have like a daily dashboard into an app. So basically, you can kind of look at what you have planned for the day. You can look at the weather for the day, and maybe even swap out modules and things like that. Change the design, change the information, and that's how we got started.
So I definitely want to talk more about the app Capsicum in a second, but you touched something that I'm wondering now, because I genuinely wonder. You said that you wanted to build this, but the technology wasn't there. But since I've known you, you've built a couple of apps. Was all of the other apps that you built like practice for Capsicum, or was it like, I just want to learn how to do stuff, so I'm going to start doing stuff? Meanwhile, I have this thought in my head about like my, I guess my Mona Lisa app down the road.
You know what? At the time, it was not in my mind. I had actually forgotten about it for a bit. Once I started building Capsicum, I realized this was like the culmination of like all the other projects that I'd done before, almost like a final project of like skill sets and tools and frameworks kind of all together. But when I was making the other apps, I was just actually scratching individual itches. I had a journaling app that I did. I had a to-do list app that I did, and a few others. And kind of over time, they just kind of turned into what would ultimately be Capsicum.
Did those apps actually like take off, or were they just like, I built this? I mean, did you ever put them out in the App Store or anything like that?
I've had a range of success with apps. So I think in all, I've probably had about 24 apps in the store at some point.
Oh, wow.
Two of them took off a bunch. So the early journal, called My Daily Journal, it did super duper well early in the App Store. It was paid up front though. So over time, that business model just didn't work out. It wasn't sustainable. And same issue with Up Next. I had an app called Up Next that was featured by Apple and also featured by Starbucks, which is really amazing. And that one, I think I got like about 370,000 users. But again, the Starbucks portion was like kind of like you had to make the app free in order for it to work out. And I didn't have like in-app purchase or anything. So that one just, I didn't make very much revenue from it, so it just wasn't like sustainable over time. But both those apps did pretty well. Like all in all, I've gotten close to 1 million downloads of my app. So
I did not realize you had like 24 apps. Wow. Okay, that's
at some point, yeah.
I mean, that's insane. Like I think about that because, I mean, I've made some projects and none of my projects are quote unquote apps. I usually do like web apps of some sort with, some Python backend doing things, but it's interesting to look back at all the things that I did create, whether they're still around or not around, including this podcast, including the many derivatives that it's had and grown from. But like, I can't even count the number of like little ideas that I had that I wanted to work on that didn't take off or whatever. Or if they did take off, they were just like kind of flashes in the pan. And I didn't really do any promotion for those. You mentioned Heidi. I actually need to get Heidi on the show. I might need your help with that because I've chatted with her before on it and she's down, but we can never seem to get things coordinated. But, Heidi is like the marketing, branding, design side, right? And then you're more like the code developer, getting stuff running side.
Right. So I was lucky enough to find Heidi through actually another one of my apps. I had a dream journal back in, when was this? I think 2011, maybe. There's a dream journaling app, and Heidi actually wrote in with a support request. She had taken screenshots of all the screens and showed me every single place where like a pixel was off by a little bit. And I was kind of enamored with that tenacity to go through and be like, okay, here's not only I have a problem, but here's how you make it better. So since then we have been friends. And then a few years later, we started working on Capsicum, which at the time was called Modular. And in between working on that and launching it, we launched 2 other apps. One was a sticker pack called Stamp Pack. Actually, 2 sticker packs with Stamp Pack. There's a Gold Stars pack, and then there is a Boomerang, which is a translation app.
I haven't tried Boomerang, but I do love Stamp Pack. I remember beta testing it. I remember using it. I actually remember reaching out. I can't remember if it was to you or if it was to Heidi and being like, hey, I kind of want to use this for something. Is that cool? And you're like, yeah, go ahead. And it's like, okay. Yeah. But again, like, it's so weird how technology works like that. And it's funny because every single episode at the beginning of each show, I talk about like, oh, become a member and da-da-da-da. And if you like this, there's all this other stuff that you can listen to and I'll help you be more productive. And in my mind, it sounds like I'm like beating the dead horse. But at the same time, this might be like the first episode that someone ever listens to for Pitt. And just like with you, you had 20 some odd, apps out there, but I knew who you were, but I didn't really know anything about what you were doing until Stamp Pack came out. Right.
Yeah. Because for a long time, it's weird. It takes like a lot of work to actually eventually get out there. So I think I started to kind of pick up a following, at least on Twitter, like a Twitter following, around maybe 2015. So around like early 2015, I had maybe 300 Twitter followers. And then that like tripled by the end of that year for some reason. And I don't even know what happened or why it happened, but it was just like a bunch of constant work. And then eventually it just kind of picked up, and I got I just kind of a bigger platform and more of a voice, and more people start paying attention to my work and things like that. But yeah, I'd been working diligently for pretty much since 2010. I've spent every spare moment that wasn't commuting to work, working, or with my family, working on something app related, either making an app, learning about apps, helping other people kind of understand apps, just pretty much like full time, did all apps all the time. And I remember in 2012, I actually like changed the license plate to my car to like iOS dev. I'm basically burning the boats with this one. Like any time I have is going to be dedicated to app development until I get great at this.
So that's interesting because, again, you've had some success before then with apps, or you've had success with apps during that time, but whether it was due to obligations to another company or whatever, they didn't seem to take off. And I think that's something that we're always hearing about. Oh, build an app, and if it takes off, then you'll be one of the few that can make a living building apps. But you've built apps that have taken off, and as you mentioned, it wasn't a sustainable model to live off of.
Right. And interesting thing about that, right? So for a while, early in the store, you could do this. You could make several apps that are of a similar type. And for a while, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make journaling apps. I'm going to make a bunch of different journaling apps. And the first journaling app I made, it sold about maybe 1 or 2 copies a day. And then I did another journaling app, and it was like probably 95% the same as the first one. But this second one really took off. It was doing a minimum of 250 sales a day for a paid upfront app for well over a year. And it's amazing that just like that 5% change made a dramatic difference in the success of the app.
And even with that, I mean, you still had the day job. You're still grinding. Like, right. I'm not one to preach the hustle mentality or the always be grinding, mentality, but I definitely see it. And that's something that I'm often asked about, like, you're doing all of these things. Why? But looking at what it took for you to get to where you are, like, you're still grinding, you're still hustling. Right. You've had apps. I mean, you've sold 1 million apps. Like, there's a YouTube series that I watch called Aska, and like they have like Ask a Millionaire, Ask a Former Drug Dealer, Ask a correctional officer, Ask a porn star. Like it's crazy because they're asking questions of people who have done things that you would normally not be able to talk to. And to me, like, one of the things that I would definitely put on my list is ask someone who's had a successful career on the App Store and see what it's like. And for me, like, you are that person, but it doesn't look much different than like what me as the young business entrepreneur, like getting my business off the ground, putting in hours after hours, like recording like we're doing right now late at night to put out content. It looks almost exactly the same. And I think people feel like, I don't know what it is. I feel like people just like get to a point where they're like, I'm going to make it one day so that I never have to do this again. But the reality is, no, you're still going to do that. Like, you're going to have to.
Basically, honestly, there's a lot of luck involved. And kind of my grinding, I kind of view it as mining for luck. So, luck by itself is not going to do it. There is a lot of hard work involved, but hard work alone won't do it either. So basically, I look at it as the harder I work, the luckier I get. But luck is absolutely like a portion of getting it done. Hard work alone doesn't bring you there.
Definitely. And I put something similar to that, like in a newsletter post that went out like a month ago about how the clients that I have now in my business are made up of the people that I've interacted with, some people that I've interviewed, people that I just went out on a whim and like just asked for, hey, look, I've been doing this for, 4 years. I have these skills. I have an audio background. I know how to, produce and edit content. Give me a shot. And being told no for like so many years and just kind of consistently putting out my own thing. And now it's like, it's still not necessarily like quote unquote taking off, but I'm in a position to where I'm making more from Pitt and like my side hustle ventures than I ever have before. But it's based on all of the people that I made connections with 2 or 3 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a while to show.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things that like you said, the Capsicum was the accumulation of all the things that you had to learn along the way. on top of, waiting for technology to actually catch up to whatever your ambition or your goal was, not to get all philosophical or productivity, pastor on you,
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of other skills involved, even outside of development, that I didn't really know about, like marketing, right? So Capsicum was also a test of kind of leveraging kind of like social media to market, because marketing is not my strong suit. And I kind of had to like learn some things along the way. And I think it was in 2014, I talked to someone and they told me basically there's kind of two ways of going about it with social. You can either put down some cash and kind of buy publicity, or you can kind of grow your network organically and then launch with organic network. But our organic network is going to take a long time, so you're probably better off, plunking down some cash. But I like the idea of doing it organically. So I spent some time just really kind of building out the social network, social infrastructure with like legitimate, authentic connections, right? Not just for promoting apps, but just like legitimately being like a member of a community and growing a community. And then after that, there's kind of like a platform. So when I have something ready to launch, something to show, there's people who are legitimately interested in listening to it. Not just, here's an ad, click on it, but like, just legitimate interest. So
I definitely agree with that sentiment of like, you can't just build a thing and be like, hey, I built a thing. Like you do have to let people know. I do think that, like you said, organic growth to me sustains longer than the, just throwing down cash. I think if you have a consistent funnel of cash, that growth can be sustained. Mm-hmm. But for most people, they don't have a consistent like source of just cash to throw into marketing. Cause I mean, I'm a marketer by day. Like that, it's expensive. Like right. Just to do the marketing is expensive, let alone to actually like pay someone to do the marketing. Mm-hmm. So I definitely get why it's so expensive, but I also think that people don't realize if you get your app featured on Mac Stories or you get your app featured on The Verge or something like that, it will help. You will get thousands of downloads just because it was on that publication. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't convert. Like it might convert in a one-time transaction. It's not going to convert in sustained interest in your product. There are people that I follow, like their newsletters I've been following for years. There's a comic that I've been reading since 2006 and they haven't sold anything to me, but the consistency of that consistent voice, putting out that thing that I enjoy and doing it on a regular basis. So I always know that there's something there. Right. That has been what has ultimately made me want to go out and buy books or buy t-shirts or do that thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really does take kind of a persistent voice in being there for more than just that launch day. Cause launch days are cool, but they're really short lived. Like, if you look at sales launch day versus like a week or two later, it's a very different scenario. So I like slow, steady growth, honestly. Launches are awesome when you have the spikes or promotions. It's cool. But my real thing is like slow, steady growth because that is sustainable. Slow, steady growth doesn't immediately drop off, whereas a spike always like falls down later.
So I have to ask, and this will probably be the penultimate question here. Okay. Capsicum was 24 apps in the making. Did it meet or exceed your expectations for what you originally imagined it to be? I know you mentioned earlier that it was supposed to be like a Franklin Covey kind of thing and that didn't really work out, but what you pictured in your head, did it meet those expectations? Did it exceed it?
It didn't at launch, no. Because there's so much that I have planned and so much in mind. It came to a point that it was a useful productivity tool that needed to kind of have like an audience and have kind of folks using it. So we launched without some of my favorite features that I'm actually hoping to add later this summer. For instance, Apple Pencil support. That's a really big one for me, but that didn't make it into the launch. So it's not exactly where it needs to be yet. And honestly, I mentioned some of the technology. All the technology that I want doesn't exist yet. One of the things I'd like to have is the ability to kind of have a viewport for third-party apps so that third-party apps can share between each other. So say you don't like my to-do system. Say you prefer something like OmniFocus or Things. I'd like you to be able to select which app you use for the to-do system and just you have the portal on the page. So you have your to-dos from OmniFocus and you have your calendaring from Fantastical and you're using Capsicum for a container for everything is kind of what I'd like to see from it. But that's not available yet. That's not really a something that Apple's providing, and the operating system doesn't support it.
Yeah, it sounds like you need a Mac app that's like not in the App Store so that it can operate outside of the sandbox restrictions.
Right, but sandboxing is something that would work, right? So if you look at the today screen of an iOS device, where you kind of see just kind of like a little snippet from each app, most of the pieces are there. It's just one little piece that needs to stitch together so that it's available in UIKit. If you look at the today screen of an app, it's basically the same thing. So each app has a view that it presents, but they don't have to know about each other in order for that to happen.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. And I love that you didn't let the idea of, but it's not my vision yet. You didn't let that prevent you from putting it out there.
Right.
That's something that I struggle with personally, just because I definitely put stuff out there before it's ready, but I often put it out too early, versus like how did you know that it was ready to be used by the majority of its users?
So Heidi and I were using it for about a year before we launched it. Just about, I think it's like 11 and a half months we were using it daily before we launched it. And we went through a few iterations of things, like even before we got to that year point. So Capsicum was in development for about 3 years. And we probably, the way you mentioned, like changing your back end, changing the way things laid out and such, we probably went through about 7 iterations of Capsicum. We're like, all right, that was kind of cool, but no, let's start over, until we got to the point where like, yeah, this is actually working. And we have like beta testers that are like, yep, this is working. We can see the people were like using it and being able to get some real value from it. So for example, one of the things we did was when Apple introduced the drag and drop API, we're like, oh, this is sweet. We can have everyone design their page just the way they want it, which is cool. But then they were designing their page every single day, and that became like a task, like a chore, and just too much work. So we realized, what we need to do? We need to have like a default template, a default layout, and then maybe later on add a way for people to customize it. So just little things like that.
And you were still able to at least put something out. And I really, just as much as I've enjoyed this conversation, I've enjoyed not just the Capsicum app as someone who did get to play around with it before it was out in the public, someone who still has it on his phone, and every once in a while I'll open it up and like move some stuff around, and I've got a couple of habits in there that are being tracked, and it's awesome to see the growth as it's happening. And I think that's something that a lot of developers, maybe for good reason, are afraid to do. But I've loved just watching your app grow from a little bit more than an idea to, okay, we're adding features. Like we're making this better and better, each day. I remember like one day being like, hey, it says the weather here, but it's not right. And you're like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. It'll be fixed next week. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then sure enough, now you have like, you can tell what the weather was in a location like on the day that you were born. Right. And that's like one of those just really awesome things to see. But I don't think it ever would have happened had you not just put the first thing out.
Right. So basically, there's something to be said for MVP. But I went a little bit further than that. Not just, hey, this is functional and this works, but the entire app is kind of based around flexibility. So anything I put there, I'm like, okay, so how might this grow and change in the future? Because Apple could change all sorts of things, and they have in the past too. So whenever we look at a component, we're like, all right, this component is its own thing, and kind of check out the fundamentals of the component and have it flexible so that in 3 years it may be different than today, but still be useful and have ways of like kind of adding functionality over time. So the way it is now isn't the way it'll be forever. It's meant to be flexible and to grow.
I love it. And I want to keep talking about it, but I know it's getting late and we still got an after show to do. So I'm going to wrap it up there. But before we do, please tell everybody how they can get in touch with you and how they can check out Capsicum for themselves.
Awesome. I am on Twitter way too often, so you can almost always find me on Twitter at iShabazz, Ishabazz. And Capsicum is on the App Store. You can just search Capsicum, and honestly, App Store search works really well. I know Capsicum is kind of like a weird word in the U.S. It means bell pepper. It's what it's called in Britain and Australia. But yeah, just put in Capsicum in the App Store, and you'll find it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Shabazz. It's me. I'm back. We're not doing the pre-recorded outros anymore. I might do those again sometime, but I wanted to jump in on this one and say, hey, I really enjoyed this conversation. And, our after show on this one is actually rather short. It wasn't very long, but it was still packed with a lot of good information. So if you want to check that out, all you got to do is become a PIT Premium member. What is a PIT Premium member? That is someone who cares enough about productivity in tech as well as their own productivity that they want to sponsor PIT. And you do that, it's $10 a month or $100 a year. And by doing that, you get a direct line to me. You get access not just in our Slack channel, but I reach out to you. I see how you're doing in life and everything else. I offer my advice where I can help out. And of course, I'm always going to give you access to that bonus feed where you can check out my conversation, the after show version with Ish, as well as all of the full-length conversations that I've had with all of our other guests on the Pit Podcast this year. So I'm super thankful for Ish for coming onto the show and helping out and teaching me a thing or two. I learned a lot about him, and I'm really excited for the next guest, and I'm also excited for what Ish has coming down in the future. So if you haven't reached out to him yet, be sure to do that. Like he said, hit him up on Twitter, check out his app, sign up, just become a fan. I know that I am. A special thanks to Nadir Omawali for the use of his music, a hustler in spite of myself. Thanks for listening to the show. And in fact, if you wanted to learn more about what productivity in tech is, means, does, all those things, head over to productivityintech.com. Again, we have that premium membership for you, but we also have other things. We have our newsletter, which is absolutely free. You can sign up for. We have our Slack channel where people come in and provide that daily motivation, that daily energy and excitement and encouragement that you might be looking for in your day-to-day. One of the millions of Slack channels that I'm a part of, but it's one of the only ones that I check on a daily basis, and it's not because I run it, it's because of the awesome people that are inside of it. And of course, you can hit me up on Twitter. You can find me personally at KJAY Miller, or you can of course follow Productivity in Tech at prod_in_tech. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope it's been a productive use of your time. And for the Productivity in Tech podcast, I am Jay Miller, and I will see you next time. Take care.